It really, yeah, yeah, exactly. It was like right when it really kicked off, and so they came up with this idea, and then actually this producer, I was at an Easy Rider.
There was supposed to be an 8th season of Iron Resurrection. Instead, one of automotive television's most beloved shows simply disappeared. Joe and Amanda Martin were still at Martin Brothers Customs, still building outrageous machines, still living the life fans had watched for 7 seasons. But suddenly, the cameras were gone. For months, fans were left to wonder whether the Martins had walked away, or whether something had happened behind the scenes that nobody was talking about. Then Joe Martin finally broke his silence. And suddenly, the disappearance of Iron Resurrection looked very different from a simple cancellation. So what really happened to the show? Join us as we reveal what exactly happened behind the scenes. The garage where everything started. Martin Brothers Customs sat in a converted space outside Austin, Texas, and the man running it was someone the wider world was yet to discover, but that the motorcycle and custom car community in the South already knew very well. Joe Martin had been building things his entire adult life. He transformed motorcycles, cars, whatever, came through the door in a condition that most shops would have turned away. And he did it at a level that turned heads at every show the finished machines appeared in. His path to television started long before Iron Resurrection gave him his widest platform. In 2004, Joe entered and won a world championship on Discovery Channel's Biker Build-Off, a competition that put custom motorcycle builders against each other in a timed format that rewarded both speed and quality. Winning that competition on a national platform gave him visibility that the regional custom car world could not have provided, and it planted the first seed of what would eventually become the show. His wife Amanda, known to almost everyone in their world as Mandy, was not a background figure in any of this. She had a finance background that was entirely different from the mechanical world of the shop, and it turned out to be exactly the right complement to Joe's technical genius. While Joe was in the fabrication bay figuring out how to make something beautiful from something broken, Mandy was building the business infrastructure that made the whole operation sustainable. She understood numbers, contracts, business relationships, and the kind of operational detail that talented craftsmen often found tedious, but that determines whether a shop survives its own success. Iron Resurrection premiered on the Velocity channel in April 2016 and drew over 1 million viewers for its Season 1 premiere, a genuinely strong number for a cable automotive show, and strong enough to signal immediately that the network had something worth investing in. The format was familiar in its broad outline. Find distressed machines, restore them to extraordinary condition, and sell them. But the execution was immediately different from that of every other automotive show on television. Joe Martin did not fix cars to a standard. He rebuilt them to a vision, and the gap between those two things was visible in every finished machine that rolled out of his shop. Jason Arrington, known as Shag, was the 3rd member of the original core team, the man who went out hunting for the machines that the shop would transform and then negotiated the back-end sales. His ability to find vehicles that others had overlooked, to recognize potential in rust and neglect, was the raw materials side of a process that Joe turned into art. The dynamic among the 3 of them gave the show structural clarity, making it easy to follow without feeling simplistic. The show grew steadily and organically through its early seasons. By Season 3, it had earned consistent renewals. The builds were getting more ambitious, the machines were getting more spectacular, and the audience was watching not just because the cars were beautiful, but because the people who made them were genuinely compelling human beings. So when the show suddenly went quiet after Season 6 in 2022, and the silence stretched into months, and then into a full year, the audience paid attention. What was really happening in that long silence? And why did it take nearly 2 years for Season 7 to arrive? The silence that scared everyone. When Iron Resurrection's 6th season wrapped up in mid-2022, there was no announcement about what came next. The show's accounts just went quiet, and fans did what fans do in these situations. They started speculating. The most pessimistic interpretation, that the show had been quietly canceled without anyone having the decency to announce it, gained traction simply because it was the easiest explanation for the absence of information. Other theories pointed to the upheaval at Motor Trend's parent company, Warner Bros. Discovery, which had been restructuring its streaming and cable properties in ways that were creating real uncertainty for every show in the automotive television space. Mandy gave fans their first concrete reassurance in February 2022, when she answered a fan question on Instagram, saying she and Joe were working on Season 6 at that very moment. That confirmation quieted some of the speculation, but could not fully address the underlying anxiety, because the automotive television landscape was visibly changing around Iron Resurrection in ways that the Martins themselves were navigating in real time. The gap between Season 6 and Season 7 lasted nearly 2 years. When Season 7 finally arrived in January 2024, it aired on Discovery Plus, rather than Motor Trend's traditional cable platform, the first visible sign of how significantly the network's infrastructure had changed around the show. The season itself was strong by every creative measure. Fan favorite Pampa returned after his departure following Season 3, a comeback that generated genuine excitement among viewers who had missed his chemistry with the rest of the crew. The Season 7 finale aired on March 19, 2024. And then, the same silence that had followed Season 6 descended again. But this time it did not lift. The silence was different this time, and what happened behind it had little to do with Joe, Amanda, or the builds. So, what was really happening at the network? The network collapse that nobody talked about. The real story behind Iron Resurrection's shutdown was not a story about the show itself. It was a story about a television network that had been quietly disintegrating around one of its own successful programs, and about a talented creative team that found itself on the wrong side of a corporate restructuring unrelated to the quality of their work. Motor Trend Group, the automotive media company that owned the Velocity channel, rebranded it as Motor Trend TV, launched the Motor Trend Plus streaming service, and had built an impressive automotive content ecosystem over the years. Iron Resurrection, Wheeler Dealers, Roadkill, Bitchin' Rides, Texas Metal. These were shows that had genuine audiences and genuine reputations. Motor Trend Plus had positioned itself as the streaming home for automotive enthusiasts, much like other niche streaming services had positioned themselves for their specific communities. But the streaming wars of the early 2020s had created a brutal competitive environment, and Motor Trend Plus was a relatively small player trying to sustain itself in a marketplace dominated by giants. Warner Bros. Discovery, which controlled the parent company, concluded that a standalone automotive streaming service was not commercially viable in that environment. Motor Trend Plus was shut down, and its content migrated to Discovery Plus and Max, completing a consolidation that eliminated the streaming home that Iron Resurrection had been built for. The impact on production was immediate and structural. When a streaming service shuts down, it does not simply stop acquiring new content. It no longer needs new content at all. Shows that had been in various stages of production or renewal negotiation found themselves in an institutional limbo where the entity they were negotiating with had essentially ceased to exist in its previous form. Budget constraints tightened across the entire automotive portfolio. Joe Martin was in the middle of all of this with no control over any of it. His show was genuinely successful by every audience metric. Season 7 had delivered strong creative content and strong viewership. The builds were at the highest quality level the show had ever produced. None of that was the issue. The issue was that the network infrastructure built to deliver the show to its audience had been taken apart, and reassembling it in the new configuration was not a priority for the corporate decision-makers. So, what exactly did Joe Martin say when he finally decided to tell the truth publicly? And why did his statement reframe everything the audience had been assuming? The statement that changed the story. In 2025, Joe Martin went public with an explanation that was straightforward and considerably less dramatic than the shutdown theories circulating online had suggested. He confirmed what had been obvious to industry observers, but had not been stated clearly for the show's audience. After 7 successful seasons on Motor Trend TV, Iron Resurrection had officially wrapped its time with the network. But here is where Joe's statement diverged from the standard canceled show narrative that the audience had been bracing for. He did not frame it as an ending. He framed it as a liberation. His exact position, shared across social media and in interview appearances, was that Martin Bros Customs was now fully independent, creating original content on YouTube and beyond, directly for its audience, without restrictions. He said this was not a goodbye, but a brand new ride. That framing did not spin. It showed just how Joe and Mandy had processed what happened and what they had decided to do about it. The Martin Brothers Customs YouTube channel had already been building an independent audience throughout the show's television run, and the transition to full independence meant that the creative decisions were now entirely theirs, without a network's production requirements or broadcast schedule imposing constraints. The audience, hearing all of this, had a complicated response. The relief that the story was not tragic, that Joe and Mandy were not struggling, and that the work was continuing, was genuine. But so was the grief over losing the platform that had brought the show to millions of viewers who would never have found Martin Bros Customs through YouTube alone. What the collapse revealed about the automotive television industry more broadly was a vulnerability that the genre's success had obscured. The shows were popular. The audiences were genuinely engaged. The talent in front of the cameras and in the workshops was world-class. But all of that was built on an institutional infrastructure that had its own fragilities. Fragilities driven by corporate decisions made in boardrooms that had very little to do with whether a pink 1956 Ford Victoria or a 1967 Camaro or a 1936 Ford Coupe was the finest thing to come out of a Texas custom shop in any given year. The work was excellent, and the business model that delivered it to its audience was not bulletproof. When it broke, it took excellent work down with it. So what does Joe Martin do with all of that now? And is the independent path he has chosen actually better than what the network was providing? The independent future. Joe Martin's decision to go fully independent after Iron Resurrection's network run ended was not born of desperation. It was born of clarity about what the television arrangement had been costing him in creative freedom, and what independence would give him control over his own work. The Martin Brothers Customs YouTube channel became the primary home for new content in 2025 and 2026, and its growth reflected a fan base that had followed Joe and Mandy out of the cable ecosystem without much hesitation. The people who watched Iron Resurrection for the builds were not watching because it was on Motor Trend TV. They were watching because Joe Martin was building extraordinary things, and the camera was pointed at him while he did it. When the camera moved to YouTube, the audience moved with it. The numbers were smaller than the cable viewership at the show's peak, but the engagement was more direct and more immediate in a way that cable television could never provide. Mandy had also built a significant independent identity outside the automotive world, giving the couple additional stability beyond the show's commercial performance. Her animal rescue work had become a serious personal commitment. she became deeply involved in wildlife rehabilitation and rescue efforts in Texas, eventually working with big cats and other large animals in a way that her Instagram following, which extended well beyond the automotive audience, responded to with genuine enthusiasm. The Mandy Martin that Iron Resurrection introduced to the world was a finance professional who happened to be married to a custom car genius. The Mandy Martin of 2025 and 2026 was that, and also someone who had developed her own distinct public identity around causes and commitments unrelated to the automotive world. Both versions were authentic. The second one had a life that was not dependent on any network's programming decisions. Once the network was gone, Joe Martin seemed to discover something he valued even more than another television deal: freedom. In interviews and on social media, Joe spoke positively about working independently. He no longer had a network deciding which builds should make it to television or a production company telling him how quickly a project needed to be finished. There was no executive looking at a complicated build and saying it needed to fit into a certain number of minutes. Joe could simply build. And that changed everything. If a project needed more time, he could take more time. If he wanted to work on something unusual, he could follow that idea. He could film the process in his own way and share it directly with people who actually wanted to see his work. For someone who had spent years building cars on television, that kind of control was hard to give up. But the biggest surprise was that the end of Iron Resurrection did not mean the end of what made the show special. The shop was still running. Cars were still coming through the door, with Joe still cutting, welding, shaping, and turning rough old machines into something people could barely recognize when he was finished. Also, Mandy was still handling the business side and helping keep everything moving. The show disappeared from television, but the work continued behind the same shop doors. What was life really like after Iron Resurrection? The life behind the builds. For Joe Martin, the end of Iron Resurrection did not mean the end of the business that made him famous. If anything, it brought the focus back to the man who had been building cars and motorcycles long before television discovered him. Today, Martin Bros Customs remains at the center of Joe's world. The shop's own website describes Joe as the owner and operator, overseeing projects from concept through fabrication, design, and custom paint. The business continues to work on cars, motorcycles, and even the occasional boat, meaning Joe's creative ambitions clearly extend beyond the vehicles viewers became accustomed to seeing on television. And then there is the money. Various celebrity wealth websites currently estimate Joe Martin's net worth at around $7 million, largely attributing that wealth to his custom-building career, Martin Brothers Customs, television work, and related business activities. But because Joe is a private business owner, there is no publicly verified financial statement establishing that figure. What is easier to establish is that Joe's career was already successful before Iron Resurrection. His victory in the 2004 Biker Build-Off helped establish him as a serious name in custom fabrication years before viewers knew him as the face of Martin Bros Customs. And while fans spent years watching Joe work, his personal life has remained considerably more private. Joe and Amanda Martin have kept much of their family life away from television. Amanda continues to be closely connected to Martin Bros Customs, while also pursuing her own interests outside the shop. Recent public information shows her continuing to promote the Martins' work and remain involved with animal rescue. There has also been plenty of speculation online about the Martins family and whether they have children. But unlike the cars, businesses, and television appearances, that part of their lives has never been clearly documented by the couple themselves. That privacy is revealing. For 7 seasons, viewers were given access to almost every part of Joe's professional world. They watched him argue over builds, struggle with deadlines, transform wrecks into showpieces, and stand beside machines that looked nothing like what had arrived at the shop. But outside the garage, Joe has remained much harder to read. And perhaps that is exactly how he wants it. In 2026, Martin Bros Customs is still operating, Joe is still building, and the Martins continue to appear at automotive events. They were even announced as returning celebrity guests for the Run to the Sun car show in Myrtle Beach in March 2026, showing that their connection to the automotive community remains strong even without a weekly television series. So perhaps the real ending of Iron Resurrection was never about Joe Martin disappearing. It was about the audience finally having to separate Joe Martin, the television star, from Joe Martin, the builder. The television show may be finished, but the man behind it is still in the shop, still creating, and still deciding what comes next. After 7 seasons of watching Joe Martin turn forgotten machines into rolling works of art, Iron Resurrection leaves us with one bigger question. If a successful show can disappear even when the people behind it are still working, who really decides when a television story is over? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.